Here we go, episode 6 with the half dozen. Who'd have thought it, hey?
Yeah.
The half dozen. Welcome back, how are you?
Good. I feel like I got the memo right in the black with the white background for today. Took off my specklies, so I didn't have any reflection that was bogging me last week. I'm good apart from the awful weather. But I'm excited for today. I think last week's brought loads of stuff, sparked loads of different conversations on social media and a couple of emails that we had. So I'm looking forward to see where we meander around some topics today. But we have a couple in mind, don't we, that we said last week we're going to chat about.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's weird, isn't it? Because there's no coaching going on, yet there's still lots to talk about when it comes to coaching. There's still obviously a little bit going on in the elite space. Yeah. But I mean, it'd be interesting to see how much of that lasts coming up soon. But my wife is off to sunnier climes in Cadiz, Spain, with one of the GB teams on Saturday for 3 weeks. So I've got homeschooling for 3 weeks, which will be interesting, challenging, and exciting in different doses at different times. So if anybody wants to volunteer to do a 20-minute homeschooling slot with a 6-year-old, knowing that you'll need about 47 tasks for that 20 minutes, then please feel free to give us a shout. You're in.
Should we watch the change in you as we go along over the weeks that she's away, and then wait till she comes back to see
I'm not going to shave. I'm deliberately going to see how big a beard I can get in that time, and how tired I'll look by the end of it.
Oh, very good, very good.
So one of the things that we touched upon previously that we said that we'd carry on and talk about a little bit more now was transitions. And when I say transitions, I'm not talking about career or journey transitions. I'm talking about in a session when you're moving to start from when everybody arrives, and then moving maybe from one practice to the next practice to the next practice to the end. And how, so from some of my experiences, lots and lots of time gets wasted and lost in those moments. Would you have similar?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So from a coach developer point of view, that's one of the things I'd look at, where the breaks are, how they're used. And I remember going to a session with British Cycling. It was when Jason was the coach, and his debrief spacing time was 2 minutes. For the entire hour and a half, every time it was 2 minutes. And we had a great rich conversation after that about the planning that went into that, not overanalyzing the question and the detail within it. That was kind of a separate conversation, but that got my thought process going. So from a PE lesson and the transition where teachers are nervous, or even coaches are nervous about delivery, they tend to pack a whole load of stuff in so there's no break. And then how much is too much with the spaced kind of learning principle behind it. When they're worried about children or athletes losing concentration or heading off in a different direction with a bat at hand or whatever it is. So yeah, I've had some different experiences. Recently, pre-lockdown, a year ago at this stage, working with a coach, and there was about 6 or 7 minutes in transition between each exercise and activity. And that caused a massive disruption to the session. But I think part of it was understanding a little bit more about autonomy and practice structure, and how to use that time effectively. So it wasn't that necessarily it needed to be less than 6 minutes for the effectiveness of the whole session, but more about what happened in that 6 minutes. So contrasting to what I said about Jason's session. So where would you take this conversation? What kind of experiences have you had?
Yeah, I guess similar. And I think probably it's encouraging coaches to start to think about planning for transition. So what happens? So the simple things I think of just setting up your area when you get there. Are you planning on moving from one area to another? So can you set them both out depending on the space that you've got available beforehand? So you don't set up one, kids play, and then you have to set up another while the kids participants are faffing about doing something else, and you kind of lost that momentum that we talk about.
Yeah.
So can you do them next to each other? Some of the little things like just the water station. So one of the observations that I had fairly early on last year within our rugby sessions was, and this was 6 and 7 year olds. So I mean, they've got the attention span of me largely, but the water bottles would stay with mum or dad on the side. So you'd finish an activity, and then the coach would say to the kids, right, off you go and get a drink. So then you lose 35 kids, like off they go, scattered around the edge to go and see mum or dad or grandparent or whoever. Then it takes you ages to get them all back in. For when you've said 30 seconds, get a drink, it's 2 minutes, 3 minutes, easily. And Callum was in the session, my son, and he came back over after going to get a drink with a mouthful of Haribo. And I'm like, well, no. To find that one of the parents is dishing out Haribo on the side.
My goodness.
So it's then trying to manage that in a sensible way so that when all the kids arrive, you've already marked out an area. Oh, bring your water bottles, you put them all here.
Great idea.
So everybody's water bottle is in one space next to the practice area where all the equipment is. And we've got like a coned off area with all the equipment in and all the water bottles. So you don't lose time for them to jog over. But just how we had to have this conversation about like how are we losing practice time with the kids here? And that was one of the real simple things, was just that kind of area piece that we started to look at.
Yeah, that's brilliant. It brings to mind, I guess, some other examples that might be useful. It brings to mind kind of, again, go back to coach developing. So if you're mic'd up or you video the session and looking for those things where people are stagnating or walking around, not saying that walking is, you know, directly related to boredom or switching off, but looking for those signals or listening to where the gaps are and how much you're filling that space or how much you're holding the silence. From a coaching point of view verbally. But like, as you said there, if you have the planning part, as we spoke about even last week with the transitions and planning for those gaps online, if you have your assistant coach, if you have one, or somebody who's getting another section ready for you, or they're able to move in, or you can see where you can stand back and see and vibe where the session is going, and then you're able to move on to that. So I guess it's having, as you said there, having the conversation after of what you've noticed, setting the tempo and setting the pace in the warm up or with those warming, engaging activities to lead you in. So what makes the difference between you going to a spot and being the autocratic flag bearer of like, right, you have 10 seconds to get here, which for some is great. I mean, I remember back to school days where we do slow-mo for 3 seconds and then you'd say go and they'd all be in, which is, you know, all the nice fun stuff. But from a serious standard point of view, if it's moving and at a nice pace and they're excited about the next drill, they should be coming with you. So it's I guess addressing it first, ways to do it, miking up or video or having a conversation, and then, as you said, look at the space that you're using. And if you only have one space and a certain amount of equipment, then it's just having the planning and being okay with that silence for a minute. Like we said at the end of last week, getting some of your leaders, even if they're 6, to share about what's just happened, a little bit of recall while you're planning a few cones, or get everybody to do a certain thing. We used to say in the PE hall, I'd get them to pick a certain word, and some of the kids would say, ice cream or pizza. So when we'd say that will be free time with a piece of equipment while you had a window to speak to a teacher or do something, and then we were back. But yeah, that's a really good example. Any other examples that you have, or how you solve the problem?
Yeah, I think one of the things that you hit upon there was a really important one, which was about the co-coach. So often we will coach with other grown-ups around us in some capacity. You know, so in my rugby capacity, I'm just there as a assistant coach. Really, it's, you know, there's a head coach and he's in charge. But it's how you then work with them. So if I'm doing a bit in the practice and working with the kids while that activity is going on, Jenny, can you go and set up the next one? But you know, because you've planned what's being set up, how it looks, etc. Or if you're confined to one area, so some teams or some sports might be kind of stuck in a smaller space, or, you know, a portion of a pitch, etc. Just even simple things like, you know, one cone on top of the other. So if the next practice is you're going from a long horizontal pitch and then you're going to go and play across it long ways, have the spare cones that you need underneath the other one, so you can just whip around and go, right, that's now a white pitch, an orange pitch, a white pitch, and the cones were already underneath, so you've not got to go and relay loads of pitches again. But that all for me, I think, comes down to better planning, better conversations with your co-coach, and better detail on thinking about the practices and the transition between those practices.
So in your mind, is there an ideal time that you should spend or could spend between activities that you're doing or within the session?
I think the answer is it depends on what you've been doing and what you're trying to achieve. Mm-hmm. So one of my pet hates is I'll go and watch a coach work and they'll do the warm-up, and then between the warm-up and the first activity, like, you may as well not bother doing a warm-up, because the kids have now warmed down because it takes so bloody long to get the next practice going.
Over,
wow, like, you've lost them, and you know what, or we know what kids are like generally, or generally any participants really. You want to be in it, doing it, and a lot of the time people go to sport to run around, get engaged if that's the nature of the sport, but you don't want to spend loads of time standing around waiting. So I mean, if they've done an activity that has been like hard and it's been full on, you might give them a slightly longer rest period, and you might well have, depending on the nature of where you're working, you may well have planned that deliberately based upon ratio of intensity and frequency and all of those kind of bits and pieces. And you may well have a sports scientist to help you along the way. But generally, if it's a game that they've been playing where they haven't had to sprint nonstop for 15 minutes, like for me, it's 1 minute, and how then coaches, so if we're working together in that transition, how do we know when 1 minute is? Who's timing it? Because coaches say, right, you've got 1 minute, go and get a drink, but it's never 1 minute. Yeah. So it should be then somebody's job to go, right, we're starting, ball rolling. Ball is rolling in 1 minute time. That's how long you've got to go and get a drink.
Yeah.
And don't be afraid to start without the kids.
Well, that's what I was just going to say. When another session I went to ages and ages ago, I was in a boxing gym. And when similar to kind of my basketball days, we had a massive clock, and for a lot of the drills, it was this 5-minute drill, it's a 3-minute drill, and it was clicking down, and you had some targets, etc. And there's right and wrongs in part of what I reflect on those. But back to the boxing gym, everything was on a 3-minute rotation for this particular session, and it was that familiarity of the beep. So the consistency then of the athletes knowing, so maybe for the first couple of sessions, you have to be the gestury role of like, right, let's go. And it's either a serious or a jokey way, but I need you out here, or the ball's rolling and the drill's going to start, or the exercise is going to start. This team are getting the ball, that person's going to start off, to add the competitiveness to it. And then it becomes the norm. So like they know that there's a minute coming, or you can extend it, but they still think it's a minute, but you're giving an extra 30 seconds. But the basketball or the boxing side of things, it just added to the efficiency, but it didn't feel rushed. It didn't feel like there was an urgency there to ram loads of stuff into a certain time. It was just really well planned. And then there was a question, or there was a pause moment to reflect for, how am I feeling? What went right there? Or for a coach to have a little one-to-one with somebody and then build on that going into the next part of the session. I think they're massive. They're so important. And like you said, if it's not managed right or planned in properly, planning for transitions, you could lose them. You could lose some. And then there's probably some injury elements there as well, but depending on the age group. And you can make it fun. You don't have to lose that fun element, as you get older or as the level goes up, I don't think.
Yeah, for me, it's a big thing about momentum. And, sometimes in practices, you want to drive the tempo of the practice because you want people to be practicing hard. And if you do a practice, right, pause, go and get a drink for 3 minutes, people have a chat and they wander back in, and all that energy, you can just see it just drop out of people. And then to get back into a practice and straight back up there, like, it's really difficult, and often they can't do it. But if it is, right, we're working at this intensity, you've got 1 minute, you're going to get them back to that quicker. So you lose less quality practice time as much as anything.
Yeah.
And I guess one of the real simple things for coaches, and again, co-coaches, is just to take a stopwatch and just time the length of the transitions or the length of the period where they're not doing anything in the session. And I did it with one of the coaches when I worked back in football days, in a primary school in a session, and I was just sat on the stage because it's primary school, right? So the stage is always out, just in case of some impromptu drama. Or they've got panto to practice for. So I was sat on stage, and this coach talked for 55% of the session. And that wasn't even just like lost in translation of moving people. This was just the coach talking for 55 minutes. Wow. And again, that for me is part of loss of practice time. Whether you're in a school and we're talking about physical education, or if it's in a sports setting, they just need to be doing more. And we always used to try and aim, or we talked about aiming for 70% practice time. And I always thought that's a bit low. I want the kids generally at 80%. You know, they should be playing the game. And I'm sure we'll get into talking about what the game is in reality. But yeah, they should be doing more than, not doing. So yeah.
Totally. And what's floating into my head then is, and probably cliched for some people listening, but where then does coaching take place? So are we of the mentality that if I have a 60-minute session, 90-minute session in that day or that week, that's the only place? So it doesn't really. It's those conversations with other people who are involved. If you are lucky enough to have a coaching team or a co-coach, assistant coach, parent, volunteer, and whoever is in, the planning part of it, what's informing that session, the little conversations just before they start into the session, the transitions, blah, blah, blah. And then what happens just after that to close off the session? Who's, where are the little peer reviews or the reflections happening to build on the next session, So like it isn't all just in that space that you need to ram it in. So it should actually be a really tiny portion of the session that you are talking, whatever it is that you analyze coming out of your mouth. I totally agree. It's been really useful to do that with coaches in the last 3.5 years.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah.
And some sports need more.
Sorry. Yeah. Even simple things like how you get the group involved to help you set up. If you're working and it's a team sport, or you're working, you might have 6 golfers in front of you. Use them to help set stuff up. Too often, like I see coaches like legging it round the Astro, trying to put cones down, and then they've put so many cones down, it looks like a plane's going to land, and just you don't like. Firstly, you don't need to do that. Just think cleverly about how you set up and use the pitch, but get the kids to do it. And it was always one of those things. Again, like I would see a coach practice. Part of a practice would finish. The coach would then do a few hundred meters picking up all the cones and then lay them out for the next ones, as opposed to just saying to the kids, right, you've got 10 seconds, go and get 4 cones, go. Yeah. And then literally within 10 seconds, all your equipment's in. Yeah. And it's the same at the end of the session, that kind of transition out. So often, people will, they might have to get off the pitch or the court because someone else is coming on. But then the coach is faffing about trying to pick everything up. We're just like, look, say to the kids, off you go. Like, they're your toys, pick them up.
Yeah, but even older groups, Nick, I think it can be part of that. It's the ownership. I think you talked about it in episode 3, giving some equipment to students or players or participants to design a session. That's part of their session. Like they may not own that piece of equipment, great if they do, but like even if they're an older group of athletes or participants, getting them in, asking them to lay them out and shaping up a session with you, and adjusting it, and then, as you said, collecting it, that is as important. So if you need to allocate 5 minutes at the end to then have quality time, maybe you're walking around with one of the players and having a chat with them as they're going, and there's a richness in that. But it's efficiency of, and it's also about team spirit. I know it's probably old school as well, isn't it? But like we did that. We pick all the balls up, we pick all the water bottles, we tidy up the dressing rooms, all those things, and then we're out the gap together,
Right. So it was England under 15 camp. We were at Loughborough University, and the coach was working, and so you had a head coach, goalkeeper coach, and an assistant coach. There's 3 coaches working. On the side of the pitch, you then also had a physio, a doctor, me as talent ID, another 2 scouts, performance analyst, a kit manager, and team ops person that used to kind of logistics and make stuff happen, right? So you had like about 9 other people stood on the side of the pitch. End of the session, coach said, right, okay, cool, we're done there. And all the adults on the side of the pitch swarmed onto the pitch and collected all the equipment, or got all the bibs, collected all the water bottles. And I'm stood on the side going, what the hell's happening here? Like, you're a doctor. You're on 250 grand a year as a full-time GP that comes into football camps to help out. Why are you going to collect cones? Like the physio doing that, like, what are you doing? Yeah. But it's because it's what they did. And the whole culture there was, well, we can't expect the players to pick it up. I'm like, why not? It's a bloody cone. They're not going to put a deltoid picking up a cone. Like, if anything, it's exactly what you say. It's about fostering that team togetherness. It's about taking responsibility, taking ownership. Because at one stage, like, there'd be the drinks bottles, not the proper drinks bottles, but like a bottle of water. There'd be loads of them scattered all over the place. And you'd have like, a couple of the adults going around picking them all up. I'm like, no, get the kids back out and tell them to pick them up and put them in the bin.
Yeah.
And it used to drive me bonkers. Like it was all of a sudden you're an international player and you can't pick up a cone. It's not that. Pick up a cone, man. It's not difficult. But
this is going in the spoiler. Oh. Well, I get you. No, I get you, the frustration of it, because then we don't know. We only have our own personal examples, but I've seen firsthand that seeps into other cultural parts. Then, like, oh, this person will do this for me and I'll just leave that behind and I'll just forget that, or someone else will bring that to me. And, that possibly can happen. I've seen it happen for sure. But
well, you're developing this sense of entitlement that all of a sudden, they're going to have these swarms of people who are going to follow up and clear after them, sort their mess out.
Yeah.
That ain't life, mate. You've got to deal with this.
No.
And, so definitely simple things like get the kids involved, or if it is kids or any participants involved. If you're going to be needing to transition and you want to do it in a quicker, swifter way, use the people around you to do that. I think it's a really, really important thing to do.
Yeah, great point.
And I want to link that to one of the things that Mike, a swimming coach, in an email that we had this week talked about. And I read the blog that he'd written. It was really interesting. And one of the things that he talked about was a 10 and 2 rule, and said basically that this thing that he picked up was you've got 10 seconds to welcome them there. When somebody comes in, make eye contact, say hello, how you doing, how's your day been? And you've got 2 minutes to set the tone of the practice.
Wow.
So that kind of 10 and 2, I thought, was a really kind of neat little philosophy. But that for me is exactly part of this. What's the tone? The tone is we're all in this together. Take those 2 cones, off you go. Go and set yourself up a goal, go play. Yeah. And in 5 minutes, when you finish, you bring them back.
Yeah.
You don't just leave them down there. But that kind of 10 and 2 thing I thought was quite neat.
Yeah, that's a great idea. And it's all about those little things, isn't it? Finding something that works for you. But that engagement piece, I think we spoke about it in episode 2, like sometimes the coaches have a load of different things on their mind. And if, say, we are looking at someone who doesn't have an assistant or nobody else around, just them in the ball bag, or, them and a couple of hockey sticks or whatever, hockey bag, whatever it is, it's where you prioritize those things. So I watched a documentary the other day, brutal acting in it, but messages so clear and similar to this: relationships being the foundation. Like, if you can connect in that 10 seconds or 30 seconds with somebody and check in with them, where the session is at, or at least they feel valued, or maybe they've come from a really crappy school day or some really tough conversation in the car or off the bus into your session, highlight of the day, and you're too busy putting cones down or writing paper or drawing up on a board, and I know that needs to be done at some stage, but like finding the time to prioritize the relationship Absolutely agree with that. That's massive. And then, as much as we say there's massive responsibilities on coaches and all the different hats they have to wear, that 2 minutes, let's just take 2 minutes on that. That is 2 minutes out of your whole day that you have to really oomph it up. You've really got to be not the clown, but you've got to get the energy behind it. You've got to connect with the motivation that's there, clarity on the message of what this session is going to be about. Maybe when things start, you don't need to be as way for the whole session, but that 2 minutes, that's a really good way of putting that. And it's hard to do that, isn't it? Like, you and I have been there, like behind the white line, as we used to call it with basketball, behind the white line. I'm like, oh my God, what a day. And last session was awful. And we had a big loss the weekend. And oh, what do we do? Over the white line. Right, here we go. And the energy of your passion takes you there anyway, doesn't it? But like, it's a tiring one to come out of an end of a session if you've kept that tempo up and that persona up. But great one to mention. Thanks, Mike.
Yeah, absolutely. What would you say would be the key thing that if you were going to say to a coach, right, to think about your transition, this is what you should consider? Because we've mainly stayed on one topic today, which is kind of unheard of for us.
It's unheard of, but it's so rich. It's so important, but the content and the detail of it. Yeah. One message. Oh, you know what it is now, and I'm probably going to struggle, because if there's some people who don't have a secondary person, they're going to go, how do I do this? But like, to stand back in a session as much as you can, to see the flow of the session so that you can lead into a transition. So what I mean by that is, if I take it from a basketball point of view, we used to have 4 quarters. So I would prepare for the quarter by stepping back 30 seconds. So I'd call a timeout at the table, know it was coming, and take it 10 or 20, 30 seconds back before I went into it. So as you know, a drill is coming to, or as I say drill, but as you know, an activity is coming to maybe the timestamp or to the end, and you see a few people getting distracted, then I would step back, listen to what to the vibrancy and the communication, look at what's happening, how people are executing whatever this session, the activity is about, to then transition in, to have the energy and the wherewithal to approach that transition with effectiveness. Does that make sense? That's the kind of stuff. So if you had, like we said already about like the miking up and the self-awareness, that is so key. But if you don't have all that and you really just want to get a snippet, then pausing before you know you're going into the next one, not to set something up, to just vibe where they're at. Because it may be a case that, I'm trying to push a circle through a square hole here. It isn't working. The session's off. I thought I was on track and things were planned properly here, but I may need to break for more than a minute, check in with where people are at, and see if the next part of the session then lifts because I've maximized the time that I had. Or if it's been heavy and you're talking about maybe some technical issues or things that are loading a little bit more in their brain, problem solving, then maybe an extra minute to have that space. So those are the kind of conversations. How aware are you of your presence and the transitions that you do have? If they do have the fortune of being able to mic up and have other coaches present to support, brilliant. But if not, just pause going into the transition. That's what I'd say. Is that too much? Is that too detailed?
No, I think it's good. It's definitely something for people to think about, and we're coming up to that half-hour mark very quickly.
Oh my gosh, right, holy hell. Yeah, we have stayed on a topic, but I do think it is super important, and it can set a whole year if you get that process in and people are familiar with it, like you said. So yeah, absolutely. Right. Well, you mentioned Mike. We've got a couple of other emails in. If people would like us to discuss a topic, Coach Convo, that's our Twitter handle @Coach Convo, or coachconversation@gmail.com. You can see down below. Episode 7 next week. Who knows where we'll go? We might stay on one topic. We might wear the same clothes. It might be crazy like that. But I'm loving these, and I'm loving the feedback, but also just loving an opportunity to speak about experiences and to unpick certain topics. Even though we have not a lot of people on the ground, it is a good pause moment for people to kind of reflect and put some things in place. So until next week, see you later.
Bye.